Configuration and testing during implementation of ERP. The configuration stage of implementation is what we're going to look at here. And part of that is setting up the software. So configuration adds all the policies and settings a firm uses. So it's not something that you're not doing customization at this stage. You're not modifying any software code, just the settings. SAP offers over 3,000 configuration tables to add policies and settings. So kind of what you might be looking at at that point is whether to use last in first out or first in first out for new inventory or in accounting. First in first out stands for you're using the inventory that comes in, and then you may have other inventory that comes in, but you take that first in inventory and you use that in the product. Last in first out means that the most recent deliveries get used in production, and the difference there is that if there are two different prices, so you're buying an older product or the same product at an older price which is lower, then there will be a difference in the amount of profit you make on those products when the cost of these raw materials is added. And it's possible to kind of change the way that the accounts look, especially around reporting time, by changing these methods. So that's one of the configurations you can make in accounting. You recognize revenue by geographic unit, product or channel. You define what legal entities or generally accepted accounting practices will be followed in total, and what the default currency will be. So all those are configurations that you put into an ordinary system. You can expand what you're doing. So for example, Dell took a year when it was configuring its SAP system to get that right before it actually went anywhere near doing it with the live system. But because there's a lot of competition between ERP software vendors, configuration options have become much more flexible and much more powerful. But however, sometimes configuration alone won't yield the desired system, and in that case you just need to do some customization. So you modify the software to fill gaps in functionality through composite applications or however you're going to do it. And it may be that the software vendor may agree to add some extra configuration options which are non-standard. The problem with this is it complicates upgrades. So when you come to do an upgrade, you've got to go and put those customizations in yet again. There are two types of customization. You can add extra fields or an extra step to a process. This is what's called enhancement. So analysts develop functional technical specs and code the changes. So it could be a consultant doing that or a systems integrator. SAP includes predefined code breaks, that's user exits that allow you to effectively plug in another bit of code. The user exit coding does not change a transaction's core functions. But however, modifications do change it or add missing functionality. The ERP vendor must be told about them and won't support them. So modifications must be recoded in every software upgrade. So most implementations make enhancements, but few make modifications. So how much customization is typical? Well, if you've got a highly customized system, 25% of the system will be standard and there will be 75% level of customization. This means the business processes have been redesigned. The redesign is grounded in SAP with increased subject matter expert input from the consultant and the client. Significant change management process with increased client involvement. It still means that SAP is a good fit, but some medium level enhancements and reports have been required. This takes about 6 to 9 months to achieve. You can then go completely shrink wrapped. 75% standard configuration, as you see in the blue square here, 25% customization. SAP is a very good fit for the way the client does does things today, so you effectively are not customizing the software as much. You don't need many enhancements because the system already provides what the company needs. No significant process redesign or change management processes required, and as a result we can implement this in 3 to 5 months. Then you have half and half, so effectively 50% standard configuration and 50% customize. There'll be some complex processes and there is a low level of functional gaps. However, although you're not doing any significant process redesign or change management process, you have increased the time over what the shrink wrap would give you to between 4 and 7 months development time. Third-party software vendors offer bolt-ons. So compare this to mobile phone vendors who bolt on extra minutes. Instead of customizing ERP software, you can have a bolt-on added. And the merit of this is that the functionality is guaranteed, and you don't have to, when you come to an upgrade, go and recode it in from scratch like you would do if it was, non-standard customization. However, it's where you're custom coding, that takes time, needs to be tested, and custom code often isn't properly tested when projects are running late, and that leads to bugs which go out and cause people a problem. Custom coding will need retrofitting to any upgrades, which may hurt integration, so that's something to bear in mind. Things that can cause a delay other than customization: unrealistic expectations from skipped change management, time taken over business process design activities and plans, lack of resources due to different goals of the company and the vendor, so the software vendor, customization bugs and delays which extends the project and leads to additional testing and cost. ERP vendors won't support the code they didn't provide, which they definitely won't. Customization can allow the ERP vendor consultant off the hook, and non-documented custom procedures make testing more difficult. So then we have the testing stage of implementation, and there are 5 types of testing. Unit testing, where you go through single process steps or a functional spec check test. Integration testing, end-to-end business process, including custom code, and you go and check that whole business process out and make sure it works. Customer acceptance testing, where you give the system real scenarios before you go live so that you can cure any of the problems you have. Security testing, that's testing the user roles to preclude unauthorized access, so making sure all the login safeguards are there. And performance load testing, testing the system at high load and high numbers of users to make sure that it functions correctly. And you would typically do this on a production instance of the software that had been set up in a conference room, perhaps with a series of PCs in there to allow you to do parallel running and check the system works the same way that the original one seemed to do. So here's a conference room pilot where you've got some re-engineered processes, the ERP system's running, it's got some test data to work on, and then you can check out whether this actually does work, and there's a link there that you can follow if you choose to. So the next thing is process documentation and test. You've got to create the process documentation, which gives you the route through planning, outline, writing and revising documentation, having it reviewed, having the customer review it perhaps, and then you get the final version. In the main window there, you've got a business process flow. You've got to check that out for every process step to make sure it works, and then go to system task for every SAP transaction, and give it a test case to see whether it actually does work. And then some of those steps then can be used to develop role-based training through a training program, a curriculum. So here's a typical scenario of dates. So a time zone test. With this test, you verify the time zone server for the UK is actually working, and you might do that in July. A technical sandbox viability test to make sure the solution is viable. You check the results a couple of, or 1 or 2 months later. General performance test comparable to a load test. So this is checking that the results come out of the system as you'd expect. Integration testing to make things work together. Load testing, so this is where you're really testing it up against what it might actually face. And then finally, so that would be something like 6 months after the start, and then go live test a month later when the system's handed over to the customer. There's a lot of knowledge and wisdom been picked up, and there is a consultant, Michael Duan, who has created the blue and green books, and there's lots of recommended procedures and best practice in there on how to do implementation well. And here's readiness assessment. So these are all tests that you can do, and you go through all these different checks to make sure every element of the ERP system is working before you go live. There are 3 types of business process testing: regression testing, integration testing, and functional testing. So the drawback of sitting at a computer and doing manual testing is it's time consuming. You need a kind of war room facility where it's not used by other people. You'll have lots of client devices, and users are prone to errors from rekeying and incorrectly keying. Users need breaks. You need to schedule the users to use the system. There are some expensive resources involved, and you need experts to actually perform that testing and manage it. So you can do automated process testing instead, and have the system be tested by a series of test servers, what's called computer-aided testing. And so you can see ECAT here. You can use multiple interfaces, and it will check out how the whole system works from the front end to the back end. So that's the end of that briefing. It's on configuration and testing of ERP, and we'll come back to this in the future